Welcome to this presentation, and if you're watching this on Facebook Live, a question and answer session on working beyond 60 if you are in the final salary scheme that has a normal pension age of 60. Now, I am David Fountain, and what I am not is I'm not a financial advisor. I am, to coin a past educational secretary's phrase, a bog standard teacher. Well, ex-teacher now. I'm not going to be able to give you any advice as such, just my opinions, and hopefully some things that you need to think about in regard to the pension scheme. One key aspect of this is that there isn't a one answer solution to working beyond 60 in order to get the best out of it. Everything is going to depend on your personal circumstances. So you are going to have to do some calculations and consider what is important to you in terms of getting the best from the pension or getting the best from your rest of your working life. The final salary scheme works out the pension using this formula. It is the number of years divided by 80 and multiplied by your final average salary. Now, suppose you started in 2000 and you worked that year, it would add 1 year to your total service. Carry on and you add another year. At this point you have 2 years in the scheme and that qualifies for the pension. Without 2 years it doesn't qualify. And you carry on adding years for the rest of your career. But what happens when you get to 60? Well, nothing happens automatically. You are eligible to take the pension at that point, but nothing happens until you take action. If you were 60 before 2022, key date, before 2022, then the scheme would allow you to add more years to the scheme. So if you worked in 2020, if you were 60 in 2019, you worked 2020, you would have 1 more year added to the scheme. That's how it used to work. That is the only enhancement. You worked to 2021, it added another year. Now, when this scheme was set up, they did not consider how it might change and how it might be altered and what might come in its place. And so that enhancement, being able to increase the number of years that's in that formula, kind of stopped when we were moved into the career average scheme. So on March 2022, end of March, this enhancement of being able to add more years by working longer stopped. And nothing replaced it. If you carried on working through to 2023, well, end of March 2022, you got 3 extra months. But if you then worked through into 2023, there's nothing added to the final salary pension scheme. If you worked on till now, to 2024, still nothing is being added to those years that are part of the calculation. And that's going to carry on forever. You're not going to get any increase in the number of years beyond that key date at the end of start of 2022. As nothing can now be added to the years part, you might think that your final salary pension is safe, that it is guaranteed, but it's not. And it's not because of this other part of the calculation. Yes, that first part, the years divided by 80, that's not going to change now. But the final average salary is going to change. If your final average salary goes up, then your pension will go up. So if you're on a promotion path, then you may well benefit from staying in the scheme and carrying on. However, most teachers in their 60s have reached a peak in their careers. And with the last 10, well, more than a decade of below inflation pay rises and freezes, you could well be losing value from your final salary pension. This is one of those things I said about it's not the same for everybody. If you're a deputy head and you've only just recently become a deputy head, then your pay may be increasing. Plus the fact you might find that your head wants to go off and do something for a month and ask you to step up and give you a pay rise. So in that sort of situation, you might gain something from your final average salary increasing. But for most teachers are going to see their best final salaries actually going down. You can check this on your statement. If your statement says that your method B is using salaries from 2014, such as this one, then you may be one of those whose pension could actually be losing value. In such circumstances, taking your pension now, even if it cannot pay out, may result in a larger pension later when you finish working. Now here's another one. Again, this one started in, well, it says there 3 years started in May 2014, the previous one in April 2014. Those two have already lost some value. We're now in May when I did this video, and so April and May, they're too old to be used. So these two cases, they're losing value at this moment. This one, however, this one is from September 2014. They're saying their best 3 years are from next September. That's a bit in the future. So they have the potential to lock that in if they want to. However, you might find that you've actually got one where your best 3 years are more recent. And so this one starts in 2018. They've got no problem until 2028, until 10 years later. That is going to stay within the 10 years until then. However, if yours is like one of these that's got 2014, then it may be worth taking it even if nothing can pay out right now. So what do I mean by not paying you anything right now? What's the point of taking it if you can't get anything now? This is the principle of abatement. And it goes back to the 18th century, 19th, 18th centuries, when pensions first started being introduced as a right. Up until then, you had the lords of the manor own the properties, kick you out of your house if you couldn't do your job. It wasn't their responsibility to look after you. They looked after you by employing you. If you can't do the work, tough mate, you're out on your ear. The state pension came in and other varying pensions came in, and they said, but they had this kind of principle, this old-fashioned principle as well, that you should not get paid more for not working than if you were working. So it's very old, it's very outdated, but it's a scheme in which it's one of the rules and we have to play by the rules. If you earn too much, of course, if you earn too much, then the pension is not allowed to pay out. There is a limit put on the total income you can have from your working income and your pension income. If you take the pension and you're still working, there is that limit. Only working in teaching, though, and only working in teaching where you're in the pension scheme, the teacher's pension scheme. You can earn as much as you'd like from other sources, and the pension won't be affected. So let me give you some examples. Here's a teacher who pension taken at 60 would be 20,000 and who's got a limit of 52,000. So I'm going to put that limit line in there, that limit of 52,000. Once their total income from teaching and the pension goes above this line, their pension is abated. So scenario one, if we take this, they have a teaching job that pays 30,000. On top of this, they can keep all of their pension because it doesn't get them up to that 52,000 limit. It only takes them up to 50,000. So they're within the limit. There's not going to be any abatement. They get the lot. However, if they took a job that paid 40,000, then the pension on top of that would go over that limit. And therefore that bit above the limit is chopped off. And so £8,000 of that pension is stopped or abated. So despite having a job that pays £10,000 more, they're going to end up receiving just about £2,000 more. And there's no limit on how much you earn, though. This is scenario 3. If they take a job that's paying them 60,000, then they get to keep all that 60,000. Of course, they can't have any of the pension because it would take them, they're already over the limit, and so none of the pension gets paid. And that's the kind of case I'm saying, well, I'll come back to that one. I'll come back to the one later. Let's take the scenario for this one is if they take a retail job, or if they take a job that's not teaching or outside the pension scheme. Working in an independent school that has left the teacher's pension scheme also comes under this category. If they took that job outside there, then that job is not counted against their limit. And so their pension is at the bottom there, and it's going up from that point. So they'll get both. They'll get the £20,000 from their pension and the £60,000 from their salary. Abatement only applies to teaching jobs that are eligible to pay into the teacher's pension scheme. And one final point, abatement only applies if you take the pension at or after you reach your normal pension age. So if this teacher had taken their pension at 59 and 11 months, that abatement limit is removed. And they can have the pension plus their salary, and it can go over the limit, because when you take it early, this limit is abolished. Oh yeah, taking it early, this limit is abolished. But if you're here, that really is not relevant to you, because this presentation was for those who are over 60. So how is the limit determined? It is the highest value, the highest revalued salary used in working out your final pension, either method A or method B. If you've got your statements with you, look for the calculation results on page 5. If method A is the highest, that will be your salary of reference. If method B is the highest, then it gets a little bit complicated, because we have to look back and see which is the highest of these ones. So this is usually on page 4 of your statement. Look for the highest salary. Now in this case, the highest value salary here, 52,661, out of the ones that are labelled as method B. That is the limit for the current financial year. Every April, that limit is raised by inflation. So if you reach the limit one year, then the pension has to stop until you get to the next April, when it will start up again to the new limit. And this is on financial years, which makes it very interesting for your final year of working, because even if you were being paid a 50,000 annual salary, in the final year you only work 5 months, so you're less likely to hit the limit. Now technically, the salary of reference is the original salary from this line and the date it was paid. So it's usually the figures I've circled there, that amount and the date that goes with it, because everything is based on adding inflation to the original salary from the date it was last paid. But at the moment, we're really only interested in the limit, and it places on how much we can be paid. So now when we know that limit means, we can look at what this means. So here's an example, very similar to what we had before. A limit set of 50,000. If a teacher is working full-time and earns 50,000, they have reached the limit. And so if they were to take their pension of 20,000, abatement would kick in and say, no, you cannot have it. And so the teacher gets their salary, but no pension on top of that. So what happens if the teacher drops a day and works 0.8 part-time as a contract? Well, they're now getting 40,000, and this leaves a gap that the pension can fill. But the pension's too much, and so that top part above the line is abated. Both of these teachers are going to get roughly the same amount of income in this year. And this is what I mean when I say to you, are you working for nothing? Both of them get the same total income, but one of them is working 5 days and one of them is working 4 days. The full-timer is getting no extra income for working an extra day. Of course, if they drop to 2 days, then when we add the pension, it doesn't reach the abatement limit, and so no abatements takes place. But in this example, the teacher is getting less than they could if they had been working full-time, and less than if they'd been working 0.8. And this is a key point when I say that abatement is actually nothing really to be feared. What happens when you reach the limit? It just means that you've got the maximum amount you are allowed to receive. And so this teacher who's working 3 days hasn't reached the limit. They've not reached the limit. All it means is they could have done a few more hours. They could have been paid a bit more. It all depends on the balance that you want to strike for your life. However, let's go back to that person who's working full-time and is getting no pension. This is the key thing about saying why you might want to take it now, even though all of the pension would be abated. The reason here, it depends on what is happening to the final salary. If the method B is falling, then we know that bit at the top, I've put locked on it, and if the method B is falling and you opt out at this point and you say, I'm going to take the pension, even though it's not going to be paid because it's all going to be abated, then that gets locked in at the amount it is. If your method B is falling and you didn't take the pension, then that pension is going to be slightly less because your final salary has dropped. Now that doesn't matter all the time you are working and the pension isn't being paid. But what happens when they stop working? When they stop working, the salary goes and you're left with just the pension. Now the pension at this point is going to be paid. And if you manage to lock it in at a higher value, then when you leave, you will have slightly more pension Learn to study. And this is very tricky because it involves this point where you're going to have to be looking into the future and saying, well, if it's got 2014 to 2017 when my salary is going down, what happens if I was to overtake that in the future? If your example I said about that deputy head who then steps up for a month or even a year to a head teacher's role, they could see a sudden increase in their final salary. If you don't see a rise in your salary coming anytime soon, and certainly not above what you have in your method B, then you're in this situation where I'm thinking you're more likely to be better off opting out and taking the pension, even if it's not going to be paid, so that when you do leave, you don't have that little drop, or quite a big drop, depending on what your individual circumstances are and what your best salaries are going to be turned into. The thing here is that when your method B is dropping, it drops month by month. And I'm going to be looking at this one. I'm going to take this example. I showed you this one a little bit earlier. And I'm going to simplify it a little. I'm going to say we've got the 3 years from 2014 to 2017, and the average is 55k. So what I've got is the current year at 57, or the oldest year at 57, then 55 and 52. It gives me an average of 55. So what happens here if we worked into September? If we work into September, this September 2014 figure is going to disappear, and it's going to be replaced by one more recently. So September 27. So I've lost my 57k salary. And by looking down my history, I find that my 2017 salary that's replacing it is a 51k. That's quite a big drop. Now, if your drop is going from 57 to 56.9, you're probably going to say to yourself, that isn't much of a drop, and I'm not going to have much of a difference in my final pension. But if you've got bigger drops, of course, that can have a much bigger effect. And it happens month by month. As you work on, your good salaries are dropping off, being replaced by worse ones, then your average is going to drop. And if you did that for the whole year, you'll find that the average here has gone from 55 to 53. That's, to about 4 or 5%. That's quite a big drop. So what happens when you leave? Well, when you leave and you take the final salary pension, you can rejoin the scheme. You go back into the career average scheme, but it's a new career average scheme. And for this one to qualify as a pension, you must complete at least 12 more months of employment. And it's another reason why it makes sense to take the pension while you still have more than a year to work. If you have more than a year to work and you take it, it means you're going back into the career average scheme and will be able to complete a full year. And therefore, you're not going to miss out on adding more to the career average pension. You're going to add more exactly the same way as if you'd stayed in. In addition, if you work less than 12 months, then you get a much lower valued annuity. And I'll come on to that in a second. In addition, if you do take the pension whilst working full time, then you're likely to get all of the pension in the final year of your job. Now, if you took it in, because the limit is based on financial years, April to the following April. And that means at the end of your career, most of you will be finishing in August, and you've therefore got April through to August. You've got 5 months where you're being paid your full-time wage, but you're only being paid it for less than half a year. That's going to leave a huge gap that your pension is going to be allowed to fill. So that final, if you do that in the last year, then you've only got 5 months that you can pay, or 4 months that you can pay into the pension scheme after taking it, and therefore it won't qualify for this new career average pension. But if you did this a year and a half before you leave, then you can get back in, and plenty of time to get extra pension in your career average and get the bonus of these extra 5 months, even if you're still working full time. Clearly, if you're working part time, it makes a lot more sense to take it because you're going to get part of the pension paid out. And something is better than nothing. Oh yeah, this is essentially what I was just saying. If you have less than a year to go, then you need to work out if getting those extra monthly payments, if your pension is 24,000, then you're getting £2,000 a month. Is it worth having 5 lots of 2,000, 10,000, against what you would be adding in those 5 months to your career average pension? 1/57th of your monthly gross, and that gets added to your career average pension, which is payable for life. Those 5 monthly payments, they're a one-off. You're getting those paid for April when you retire through to August when you've retired and you're still working. against being able to add those months to the career average scheme. And again, that's a balance. If you've got a large final salary pension, then it clearly tips the balance in the favour of taking those monthly payments straight away against adding a little bit to your career average. And it is quite a little bit. I mean, if you're talking a salary of well, you'll have to do the maths on that and simply divide your monthly income by 57, and that will tell you how much you're getting. So as a summary, this really only applies if you're over 60. If you're under 60, then in almost all circumstances, not all, but you've got to do the checks, in almost all circumstances, if you can get if you can get the pension before you reach 60, then these limits on abatement completely go away. You can have the pension and your full-time salary with no limit if you can take the pension before 60. Problem is, you've got to have a break in employment, and employers can get funny with allowing you to resign one day, have a gap, and then re-employ you a day later. Some may even take advantage of it and say, okay, you've resigned, goodbye. So it is tricky. However, if you're over 60 and you want to take the pension, then you do not have to leave employment. And this is causing confusion because quite a few of the telephone operators at the pension scheme are telling people that they've got to have a break in employment. It's not true. The regulations say you've got to have a break in pensionable service. That is not the same as pensionable employment. You can do it by opting out of the pension scheme. If you opt out of the pension scheme, it triggers what's called your entitlement day. The pension has to start from then. So if you opted out now in May, you will start getting the pension on the 1st of June. You still have to apply for it to be paid, but 1st of June would be the earliest you can get it at the moment because we're in May. Do check the limits. If you are on a rising pay scale, if you have been promoted or you think you may stand a chance of being promoted to a higher pay than your current method B, then do check what the limits are and see whether or not it's worth you taking it now, or whether it's worth hanging on and waiting a bit longer. If you're not being paid anything and you're within a year of finishing, you've then got that decision about what you're going to do. Can the pension pay out now? Well, if you're in your final year, it can pay out the remaining months. So I'm afraid you've missed April and May, but it can pay out June, July and August. So you can get 3 monthly payments for the sacrifice of not adding 3 months to the career average scheme. If you've got more than a year left, you're in a great position because you opt out for a single month. You lose 1 month only from the career average scheme. You'll get all 5 months next year. And if you're part-time, you'll probably get something for this year as well. If you're working full-time, you may get something. It all depends on what your salary of reference and what the limit is for you. If your method B is going down or your method A is going up, then you've got to look and say, is it worth taking it out now and getting my final pension locked in? Unlike people who are under 60, who are locking things in and get to use future salaries, with those of you who are over 60, as soon as you opt out, you've locked in and it's used to calculate your pension. You can't then use any future salaries. So if you are that deputy head looking to maybe step up for a bit into the headship before you retire, then you may want to consider not opting out just in case you get that improvement. But it's going to come down to that balance again of whether you think what the likelihood of that is against what you would get now. So, and then the last thing, essentially, if you're in the last year, if you're going to be going this summer, do you want those extra payments now, June, July and August, or do you want an extra bit added to the career average pension scheme? So I'm going to close the presentation now and switch into the question and answer sessions.